So I welcome you all once again to the PragatiE Vichaar Literature Festival with another prominent guest and author, Mr. Vaibhav Purandare, Senior Editor of Times of India. And we are looking forward to have a very insightful and knowledgeable session with Mr. Purandare. So here to you, sir. Please start by introducing yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Pratik. I am Vaibhav Purandare. My latest book is Hitler and India, the untold story of his hatred for the country and its people. This is my fourth book. My previous three books have been about Savarkar, the true story of the father of Hindutva, Bal Thackeray and the rise of the Shiv Sena, and Sachin Tendulkar, a definitive biography. So these three were my previous books, and Hitler and India, published by Westland Books, is my fourth book, which is out recently.
Yes. Okay, so we'll start with the question straight away because I'm sure the audience will be very keen to see this reflective part of Hitler's image in India, what we have only made of. So the first question is, do you think your book, Hitler in India, is going to break the chain of Mein Kampf being the bestseller in India till date with the research you have presented in your book?
That's an interesting question, Pratik, because Mein Kampf is the reason I started writing this book in the first place. When I was reading Mein Kampf many years ago, I suddenly came across a passage in it about India, and I was taken aback by that passage. Because in India, we have this belief that Hitler fought against Britain in World War II, so he must have been a friend of India, as India was under British rule at that point in time. And we have all seen the photograph of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose shaking hands with Hitler during World War II on German soil itself, because we know Netaji had gone to Germany to seek Germany's support in the Indian liberation struggle.
Yes.
So because of these two things, we believe that Hitler must have been a supporter of the Indian freedom struggle. But when I came across this passage in Mein Kampf, I was completely surprised, because here was Hitler not only criticizing India and the Indians, but mocking the Indian freedom movement and saying all kinds of nasty things about the Indian freedom movement, and making it clear that he did not want to associate himself or his party with the Indian freedom movement. And his hatred and contempt for India and the Indians comes through in that passage, because he makes it very clear in the passage in that book that he'd rather have India ruled by the British than by anybody else. And he certainly does not want to encourage self-rule by the Indians, because he believes that Indians are racially inferior. So he was thinking in pretty much the same way as the British were thinking at that point in time. The British were looking at us as racially inferior people because we were not white. And Hitler similarly was looking at us as racially inferior people and misfits racially in his worldview, because we were not Nordics or whites or the original Aryans as he believed the Aryans to be. So we might believe, or many of us might believe, that because he used the word Aryan race, and because the word Aryan is derived from the Sanskrit word Arya, he actually may have derived from India and Indian philosophy and Indian thought and all of that. But his conception of the Aryan race was very different from the way we believe it to be. And he didn't even consider Indians to be humans. He considered Indians to be subhumans. And he makes it very clear. And that made me very curious about whether he had said any other things elsewhere about India and Indians in his political career. And I was surprised when I looked at the archives and when I did extensive research on the subject, that right through his political career, he keeps talking about and writing about India in in very highly critical terms, and he dismisses India and Indians and Indian culture and Indian civilization in the strongest possible terms of hatred and contempt. And I was surprised again because I thought that Hitler would have India somewhere at the edge of his consciousness. But he constantly talks about India right through his career, right from his early days as a political agitator in 1919, almost up until his suicide in a Berlin bunker in 1945. So my book has all the astonishing details about what Hitler said and wrote about India actually, which is in complete contrast to what many of us believe.
Yeah. So, so my like
So I
as you
am hoping, Pratik, that my book will replace Mein Kampf
actually
as
what I perceive is it stands very opposite to main camp. As a the mirror reflects. Your book is a complete reflection to what Indian society still believes of Hitler. So I'm actually looking forward to read this book very like with very much curiosity. So
thank you.
yeah, so I also hope that audience would be looking forward to it. So yeah, I'll again move forward to the other question, that the representation of your book is an opposite end to what Indians have an image of Hitler. So what were the challenges you faced while doing such a thorough research for the book?
The main challenge for me, Pratik, was in discovering archival material. And I had to go through literally thousands of pages of German archival material and archival material from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s. A lot of this material is not really easily available because
Yes.
it's tucked away somewhere in the libraries in Germany, in Britain, and some of it is in the libraries in India. What I was looking at was not merely Hitler's writings and speeches. Of course, his writings and speeches were extremely important, but there are many records of Hitler's speeches in front of his party people, his military conferences, which he had with a very small section of people, with his close confidants, certain party interactions where he talks about various issues, and some of his speeches which he made in his very early days as a political activist in Berlin and in Munich. These are Nazi party meeting minutes, which are not published in any newspaper, but they are part of the Nazi party record and they are there in the German archives. And I had to obtain these minutes and look through those documents, look through documents of British India and British government records, because Indians were being ruled by the British at that point in time, like we mentioned earlier. When Hitler came to power, I will give you an example. Several Indians who were living and studying and working in Germany were arrested by the Nazis and thrown into prison, and they were assaulted. Now, I wanted to find out more about these people. What happened to them? Why were they imprisoned? Why were they arrested? Why were they assaulted? And Indians were British subjects at that point in time. The Indian government was a British government. So what did the British government do in order to secure the release of these Indians? I found in the Indian press archives references to the arrests, condemnation of the arrests, comments about the arrests, and mistreatment of Indians in Nazi Germany. But what were the British doing? Were they reacting at all? And in the British parliamentary records, I found references to the discussions that happened about these arrests and what had happened to the Indians there and all of that. So I had to look through various archives, not just the German archive. The German government archive was extremely critical because you got the German official stand and response there. But I had to look at the Indian responses. I had to look at the British British government responses and all of that.
Right.
And that's one example. Similarly, there are other examples of what all happened during that era.
Yes.
And I had to look at various documents to corroborate statements, to look at responses to certain statements, and all of that. So it was painstaking research, and it took me almost 10 years, a decade, to complete that research and to write this book.
Actually, the main motive behind asking this question was because, whatever has been said and written about Adolf Hitler in India is quite in favor of his image. So when this book stands completely opposite to that, it might have been it might have been it might have been a challenge for you to research about it. And as you mentioned, it took you, decades to take out all those archives in the history. So
Yeah,
yeah,
what's happened, Pratik, is we seem to have developed some sort of loss of memory about Hitler. Because
yes,
when I looked at the Indian media's archives from the 1930s and 1940s, I saw that there were Indians who were writing letters to all the prominent national newspapers saying that has made very negative remarks about India and Indians in his autobiography, and we should not trust him because he does not believe that Indians are human beings. And the Nazis do not like Indians. They consider Indians to be racially inferior. So Indians were totally aware about Hitler's views about India and the Indians during his lifetime. But somewhere later in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and of course later at the end of the century and in our new century, we seem to have completely forgotten about this chapter of history that existed and have a very different idea of what Hitler means to India and the Indians. So I think it is high time we got back to that chapter of history and realized what had actually happened and what Hitler actually thought about us and said about us and wrote about us, and how the Nazis treated Indians. Like I said, Indians were arrested, assaulted in Nazi Germany,
yes.
and we have completely forgotten this. But all of these details are there in my book.
So don't you think that Indian history textbooks that carry about, a chapter about Adolf Hitler starts to polish the image of Hitler in India, and that is, one of the major reasons Hitler has such a positive image out here in our country.
Yes, Pratik, like I mentioned, we seem to have developed a loss of memory, and that loss of memory is principally responsible for the portrayal of a certain image of Hitler.
Yes,
That image is totally incorrect as far as Hitler and India are concerned, because the way Hitler looked at India is not the way we thought he looked at India.
yes,
So it is time that we corrected this image in order to have an accurate picture of Hitler and India and what India meant to Hitler and the Nazis and how they looked at us and how they saw us and how they reacted to us and what they believed about us. Because we are aware, we often discuss about Winston Churchill and we discuss about
yes,
Churchill's racism. And he was out and out a racist. There's no doubt about that. But Hitler had very similar views about Indians. And that is what we are totally unaware about.
yes.
And that's the reason I wrote this book, that it's high time we read about these things, and it's high time we figured out what the truth really is.
Yes, I can. I totally agree with you because while I was a student and when we were taught about Adolf Hitler in the Indian history books, it actually generates the curiosity to read Mein Kampf. So
Yes.
yeah, so it starts to generate that the positive curiosity to know about the dictator more. So like we can relate this situation with our current time, saying ki the in present time where Indian politics stand, many people have been mocking from behind that we also need a dictatorship in India. Many people have mocked about this. So these are the ideologies that have never been read upon. What I believe from your source, whatever I've found out. So do you believe in that these mocks are really from the people who are unaware about these things? They haven't known about anything of the ideologies of Hitler.
Yeah, I think there are two, three reasons why I believe that in a number of Indians often say that we need dictatorship and all of that. One reason is that we really haven't had a long experience of dictatorships.
Yes.
Uh, it's people who really experience dictatorships who realize how undesirable these things can be and
Yes.
how they result in the curbing of freedoms and in harassment, persecution, violence, and
Exactly.
all of that. So we haven't had a long experience of that. The second thing is we have plenty of frustrations about the way democracy works. And those frustrations are genuine. I will
Yes.
not dismiss those frustrations. A number of people make the mistake of dismissing those frustrations.
Yes.
Democracy is a slow process. And unfortunately, we have made it worse with our bureaucratic red tape, our corruption, the criminality that is rampant in our system, which further increases this frustration. In any case, democracy is a much slower process than dictatorship.
Exactly.
And these negative things that we have introduced because of our flaws in as people in government and people using our systems and all of that, and because of
Yes.
our failure to bring about reforms in the democratic process which could speed up things, we get frustrated and we jump to the conclusion that perhaps we need a dictator. I would not dismiss Indians who say this as stupid people who don't understand. There are a lot of people who do that, and I think it's a mistake to do that because they are reflect they are reflecting a kind of frustration with the system. And every Indian, to some extent, who is not privileged enough, has certain frustrations with that system, which are genuine. But the
Yes.
answer to that is to create greater awareness about dictatorship in the first place so that Indians know what it really means. And we haven't told them enough. We have forgotten chapters of our history. So,
Yes.
how will the ordinary Indian know about it? As academics, have we told them enough? In our textbooks, have we told them enough? Do we teach enough about dictatorships in our textbooks in schools and colleges? And then we simply blame people for praising dictatorships. No, they are not in love with dictators. They just reflecting their own frustrations. So if we create awareness about what it means, and this book actually might help in raising a certain kind of awareness about that, I'm hoping. But we will be fully aware of what it means and we will certainly not fall in for that. And let us not forget about one thing, that we often say that Indians love dictatorship and all of that. But the one time that we experienced an officially declared emergency, in 2 years' time, the Indian voter, who was largely illiterate at that point in time in 1977, totally
Yes.
rejected that emergency and defeated those who had imposed that emergency. So, Indian voters have always shown that they are not in favor of an iron hand to the
Yes.
extent that we believe they are. So, I would not blame the Indian people, but I would blame our loss of memory for which our intelligentsia, our media, our scholars, our textbooks, our education system too is responsible.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure your book is going to bridge the gap we have built, between all those things about the awareness and about having less knowledge about things and mocking for the dictatorship over democracy. So, okay, so I'll move forward with my next question, and that is, what do you personally feel of the ideologies Hitler moved on, like his ideologies?
See, race was at the heart of his political ideology and his political philosophy and political theory. And according to that theory, the Nordics or the white people were people who were not only destined to rule the earth, but had the sole right to rule over everybody else on earth.
Yes.
And people who were brown and people who were black in color. So the Asians, the Indians, the Africans, and anybody who was not a white was not a human being and not an Aryan. They were subhumans. So Indians were subhumans. And we did not deserve any rights. We did not deserve any freedoms, according to him. We deserved nothing but hatred and contempt. And Hitler was firmly of the belief that British rule was the best thing that
In
happened to India, because the British had, according to him, the God-given right to rule India, because they were Nordics, they were white people, and Indians had no right to rule over themselves. And in his writings and speeches, more than once he referred to British rule and India
yes.
and British rule in India as an example for Nazi Germany to follow and emulate. So he says, for instance, that when Germany conquers Russia, Russia must be Germany's India. What he means is Germany must rule over Russia the way the British have ruled over India. We must exploit the resources of that land. We must exploit the people of that land. We must deprive them of their basic freedoms, of their basic rights. We must establish a colony there. But he also says, and these are things I've mentioned in my book, and these are straight from Hitler's speeches and writings and from the established written record. He says that, but the British made a number of mistakes when they were ruling India. They educated the Indian people. That was
Yes.
a mistake, according to him. He says we should not educate the Russians. We should simply exploit them. Because when people get educated, they develop an awareness about their rights and responsibilities, and then they might revolt. So we should not do that. So the British are doing a lot of good things in India, like exploiting the Indian people and depriving them of their rights and looting that country and all of that. But they are also making mistakes like teaching the Indian people
Teaching
and
trade.
all of that, which we should not do with the Russians. So this is the kind of idea he has. And this is the kind of perversity that he demonstrates about India and the Indians.
Hmm. All right.
And he makes very scornful remarks about Mahatma Gandhi, about Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Indian Legion, which Subhash Chandra Bose tried to set up on German soil during the Second World War. He makes contemptuous remarks about other Indian leaders, and all of this is a surprise. Uh, One of the myths that I have tried to explode, and in fact, successfully, I can say exploded in my book, is the myth that we hear about all the time, that Hitler offered Dhyan Chand a citizenship of the Third Reich and a position in the German army. This is a complete lie. Hitler never offered Dhyan Chand German citizenship, nor did he offer him any position in the German army. Hitler did not want to host the 1936 Berlin Olympics in the first place. He didn't want to host the Olympics because he didn't want the brown people and the blacks, the browns like the Indians, to come and play in and participate in sporting activities on Nazi
Land.
soil, on German soil. But the Indians came and they also won the hockey tournament the hockey gold medal very handsomely. And there is absolutely no evidence that Hitler offered Dhyan Chand any position or he praised Dhyan Chand or anything of the sort. This is a story that has straight come out of somebody's imagination. And we are now spreading that story on YouTube, on WhatsApp, on all kinds of social media. There's no basis to that story at all. And I have actually completely demolished that lie in my book. So I think it's very important to demolish these falsehoods that also we have internalized to some extent, or are being made to internalize by people who easily get taken in by these theories.
All right. On the part of your exploration, you have also mentioned that Hitler never actually welcomed Subhash Chandra Bose, and he met him, after making him wait for more than a year. And he
Yeah.
also wrote something in favor of India just before few days he did his suicide. So do you think that these things are interlinked? While Hitler knew that he's not going to live more, he did some favors towards the Indians, or the Indian freedom struggle?
Yes, absolutely. You're right, Pratik. These things are important, and they are linked. Hitler never wanted to offer India any support in her freedom struggle.
Yes.
From 1933, the year in which Hitler came to power in Germany, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose was among the most prominent Indian leaders to criticize Hitler for his anti-India approach and his anti-India remarks. And Netaji was among the first to ask him to delete the anti-India remarks that he made in his autobiography. When students and other Indians living in Germany were harassed on German soil, Netaji was among the first to condemn those actions of Nazi Germany and again to criticize the Hitler regime. But when World War came, Netaji came to the conclusion that Nazi in Germany's negative energies could possibly be used in a positive way to put pressure on Britain in the Second World War, since the war had already begun. So
Yes.
Netaji didn't really have a positive view about Hitler, but he went there thinking it's the enemy's enemy and let's seek support of the enemy's enemy in the World War. So firstly, let us get rid of this idea that Subhash Chandra Bose thought highly of Hitler. He did not. And he was totally aware of how anti-India Hitler was.
Yes.
Though from the moment he landed on German soil, Netaji kept asking Hitler for a meeting and for a declaration in favor of Indian freedom. And Hitler consistently refused to offer that declaration. Even when Mussolini agreed to offer that declaration and Japan agreed to offer such a declaration in favor of Indian independence after the war, Hitler was the one who held out and said no. Hitler was simply not willing to offer any kind of statement in favor of Indian freedom. Like you said, it was only in the year 1945, very close to the point at which he committed suicide, that Hitler finally agreed to issue that kind of a declaration in favor of Indian freedom. And that was because the war was more or less lost. And Hitler had to latch on to anything that he possibly could. So it was a sort of fig leaf. Okay, latch on to anything, offer these people their support in their freedom struggle. So maybe they will support, the others will support, somebody else might come to our rescue. But it was too late by that point in time. Whenever he was in a position of strength, Hitler had nothing but hatred and contempt for India. And even that declaration that he offered at the fag end of his life was merely a formal thing. It did not really mean anything. It was just a formality. And Netaji tried his best, but he could not get that declaration out of Hitler. And I have established that in a very detailed manner in my book on the frustrations of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose when he goes to Germany, tries to get their support for Indian freedom, and how he goes through a very difficult time in Nazi Germany. We seem to believe that Netaji was treated very well there, and he got on very well with the Germans, with the Nazis. No, he did not. He had a very difficult time. But Netaji was obsessed with the idea of India's freedom. And
Yes.
he was willing to put aside his ego for the sake of Indian freedom. And that is why he swallowed a number of these difficulties and challenges and had a really difficult time. So I have an entire chapter in the book about how Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose goes through this enormously difficult time in Hitler's land and finally goes to Japan, getting absolutely nothing from Hitler, not even a declaration in favor of Indian freedom, only a submarine in order to go to the east.
Yes. I hope that it's gonna cleans up all the image Indians have made of Hitler in their mind, and with all that elaborated answers you have given, that answers all my questions. And I'm surely I individually am looking forward to read this book. Uh, Being someone who had a positive image of Adolf Hitler might needs to be a question much. So. I'd like to conclude the session with you, sir. And I'm sure the audience must have enjoyed uh, listening all the elaborated answers, and the curiosity must have grown for reading Hitler and India, and what were the views Hitler had on India. What we actually think was surely not. And it is quite clear with the book you have written, standing opposite to the main camp, and that is Hitler in India. And I wish you all the best for the book. It has been doing great. I wish you more success for the book and for the future endeavors as well. So thank you for joining us on this literature festival. And your last words, please.
No, I just want to thank you, Pratik, for those very kind words about me and my book. And I only hope that more and more readers will look at the book and the text so that we understand what is a completely forgotten chapter of Indian history, that uh, the sooner we know about, the better it would be for all
Yeah,
of us.
exactly.
And I'm really thankful to you for this very nice conversation, and to your literature
Pleasure,
festival
sir.
for inviting me for this talk.
Privilege is ours, sir.